Welcome to the Teen Life Podcast, where we explore your questions to help you make meaningful connections with teenagers, because no teen deserves to feel alone. Now, today we have an extra special episode because we're still asking questions and we're answering questions, but we have a special guest, which is Brenda McAdoo. And I'm also joined by Nino Elliott today, who's stepping in for Tobin after he had his baby. So we've got just a full episode that you are going to be blessed by the wisdom that is coming from Brenda especially. But Brenda, let's kick it off. Why don't you give us just a little introduction into who you are before we get into your stuff today?
Great. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm Brenda McAdoo, and I'm currently the chairman of the Teen Life Board and love the work that we do with teens. My background is that I spent 24 years as an FBI special agent. 22 of those were as a hostage negotiator, dealing with people in really dark places and in hard times. So I became interested in why people do the things that they do. And since then, I've retired, and I now work for Abilene Christian University as a professor in conflict resolution.
Yeah. So, I mean, the stories I'm sure that Brenda can tell us, are going to be something that we've been wanting to get you on the podcast for a long time, Brenda. So I'm glad that
absolutely. Glad it happened.
It finally happened. So let's start off with the first question. And we're actually going to have 3 episodes with you. So there's going to be more coming because as we were looking through questions, I was like, I can't get it all into one episode. But today, let's kick it off with, why is trust the foundation of any meaningful conversation? And then how do you build it quickly? Like, for our listeners who are like, I've got teenagers in my life and I need to build this trust. How can they do that?
Yeah, trust is really important for connection. And trust is not an easy thing to build unless you have a relationship. And so we talk a lot about how do you build it quickly with strangers, which is what I had to do as a hostage negotiator, and to build it quickly because there was something going on that needed to happen. But really, as a parent, or as an important, adult in a teenager's life, you can build rapport. And sometimes it does take time, but there are some things that you can do to speed it up, especially if you have a short amount of time. You need to get to know them really well and build that trust. Really, it's about giving them a sense of safety. It's not so much about what you do, it's about what they feel. And so as we figure out how to have a shared space and building common ground, it's not always about, oh, do you like the Mavericks? Or are you more of a, Stars fan because you like hockey? It really is about, do you trust me? Do you feel safe saying things to me? One, that I'll keep that confidence if I've told you that I'll keep your confidence, but that connection is strong enough that I feel safe talking about hard things. And so there are a couple things that you can do to build it quickly. The 2 things I would say to build it quickly are listen with empathy. And those aren't always easy for people because personality-wise, a lot of us are not wired for empathy innately. Now, there's some people who are, and I will say, those of you out there who have empathy for others, you feel with others, it is a gift to the world. I do not have innate empathy. I had to learn how to develop it and convey it to people. But also for those of you that have it, you need to guard your hearts because it can also be a curse to you.
Right.
Because you feel with others. And so that can be hard. But with teenagers, to be able to listen to them without judgment and managing our own reactions. Again, self-regulation is a real thing about emotional intelligence. That's another talk. But being able to listen without judging, taking stock and being able to be quiet first before you give your 2 cents. As parents, we love to give our 2 cents. I've got 5 kids. They have all heard my 2 cents. But sometimes when I know that they're worried, distressed, that they're a little bit scared they're going to get in trouble, whatever those things are, then can we wait? Can we be still for a moment to be able to listen through whatever they have to say? Even if we don't agree, we're frustrated, we don't like it. Like that happens, right? And then being able to listen with empathy so that they feel understood, not that we agree always.
Right.
But that we truly do, are listening to them with understanding.
I love that. I think I've seen that in our groups I had a group the other day, and one of the first questions they asked was not like, what do I like or about my family? It was, are you coming every week?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just that ability to feel safe. And I was like, okay, that matters more than even what we're doing or that I brought snacks. But are you going to come back? Are you someone that is safe and that
Yeah. Not
I can
just safe,
trust?
but consistent.
Right.
Like, because frankly, teenagers are at a point in their lives where they don't have a lot of bandwidth for people who aren't going to stay or who don't show up fully and be present.
Right.
And so those things are really important.
I liked your non-judgmental aspect, because I think a lot of times, and we've talked about this in our groups, for our groups as facilitators especially, but is the ability to have a non-shocked face, right? And so if you want to gain trust, they're going to potentially say things that they're gonna gauge how do you respond. And so to be able to pause, listen, and kind of almost show no emotion, or appropriate emotion maybe, but I think that's a big one as well that aligns with that.
Yeah. And I would say, as parents and as important adults in kids' lives, that we have to be able to be shock proof, is what I call it.
Good.
But you don't have to be unemotional.
Bulletproof.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I think that they do want to see something from us. They don't want us to be cold. 4 of my daughters are now grown and they're off in college. But one of them said something important to me this last year when she came home from college. And she said, I'm really thankful that you didn't freak out when I told you things. And it's not that I didn't have emotion. It's not that I didn't, when she said hard things or she said things that shocked me or that I hurt for her, right, in those spaces, but I didn't freak out. So I didn't take the next step to say, don't ever say that again, or that's crazy, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think that ability to be shock proof, right, that we don't react, that we can take it in, but we don't have to react right away.
Now, you've talked a lot about creating that safe space and how important that is. So what are some like effective, practical ways that we can create a safe space for teenagers where they can open up outside of, I know you mentioned listening, but what are some other things to make the space?
Yeah. So nonverbals are huge for kids. They will watch that more than they will your words. So that is a little bit about how you hold your body. Like, we're not always aware that we're tense. Sometimes I realize I'm sitting, right? I'm sitting somewhere, and because I'm like leaning in and I'm kind of still and my holding my neck a certain way, I can tell like, oh, I'm tense. Well, they can see that. More than see it, they sense it. And so I think our nonverbals have to match our words. And then our tone has to match our words. So I give people the explanation, that can maybe the example where if you say, I'm fine, you can say it different ways. I'm fine is very different than I'm fine.
Right.
And so tone really matters. And so if we can match our tone and our body language with our words, that's what creates safety. Because consistency, not only in you showing up, right, but in how you behave with them in the hard times. You can behave however you want when things are easy and they're happy and nothing's going wrong. But when things are going wrong, can you behave in a way that shows them, I'll show up, I'm present, but I love you unconditionally? And the unconditional piece, they need to know that no matter what they say or do, that you will still treat them the same. Now, that doesn't mean they don't get disciplined. That doesn't mean there aren't consequences. They're natural consequences.
Right.
So lots of things teenagers do. But can there not be consequences to how I treat you and how you feel in my presence, right? So that we don't get to where we're dismissive or we show the disgust or all the things, right, that put up a wall between.
One of the things that we talk about, and you probably know better even than us to teach this, but in our training is even nonverbal cues to show I'm listening. Like the things that I do, I can do certain things in a group. I can make eye contact. I can lean forward. I can nod my head. Like, are there other things like that you're talking about nonverbals that can help us show, hey, I'm hearing you and I understand you even?
Yeah. So the FBI and every other police agency that has hostage negotiators teaches something called active listening, but so does sales. So does marketing, right? So do all the persuasive
Yeah.
lawyers. I mean, like anybody who has to persuade someone kind of studies this, but that's where it came from. And so those active listening skills include that. And so they are minimal encouragers. It's the wow, okay. It's the nodding, the smiling a little bit when someone's talking, anything that minimally encourages them to keep talking. So actively listening, the reason we say active is that it encourages them to continue their story their way. Right? If you ask them to bombard them with questions, it'll sound like an interrogation. It'll sound like you're drilling down too far to get in their business, and teenagers don't like that. And so how can we actively listen? So both if you do the leaning in, smiling, nodding, and then add some of those verbal things as well. In addition to the minimal encourager, you can do a couple other things. One of them is to paraphrase. You've got a kid who's been talking to you about something for a bit, and then when they stop or take a breath, you can either ask a question, which we'll get to asking questions, but you can also paraphrase or summarize what they've said. It tells them not only, I heard you, but I can put it in my own words, which conveys understanding. So there are some things as you're having that conversation, even if they're just small things, that you can say, like, let me see if I got that right. When you went to this class, this is what happened. And I use my own words to show them that I took it in, but I also really understood it. Another thing that you can do is what we call reflection. And with reflection, you're just going to take the last few words of what they said and say it back to them. It's like a mirror. If you do this really well, people won't even know that you spoke. So here's what it sounds like. It's not magic. It's just, it's communication skills.
Yes, I know.
So as somebody's talking, they're telling you like, hey, I had some trouble setting up my equipment and nothing would go right. And, my friend was over here like bugging me and, just really pushing you. Yeah, they were pushing me and I felt kind of stressed. All I'm taking is like 2 words at the end, 1 or 2 words at the end of what they've said. And I'm sliding it in with my own inflection that's like a question. And because of that, they continue the story past what they might normally do.
Fascinating.
And so they don't even recognize that you're saying it, but you're encouraging them to continue talking to you. This is really good for teenagers because sometimes they come home from school. I have a teenager. Our last child is in high school right now, and I will ask him how his day went. And he's like, fine, or nothing happened, or it's the same. But he just says same. It's like one word, right? So then I'm like, okay, well, what question do I ask now? Well, I usually ask anything funny happen. Once he starts to tell the story, now I'm going to use minimal encouragers to show him I'm there and listening and present. And I wasn't just asking because I ask every day when you come in how you are, but I'm actually interested. And so then I'll repeat something back, or I'll use a reflection, which gets him to continue that story. I'm going to learn way more than I would have about him and his friends and his day, and then how he's doing. And those can be really powerful in that beginning a conversation, especially.
Right. So even just finding, okay, what is the thing that's going to get them talking so that I have
something to work with.
Right.
Right.
Okay, I do have a question because there have been times where I have paraphrased and they're like, no, absolutely not. You're so off. So how in that moment as an adult can we respond in a way that's like, okay, I was wrong?
Yeah, exactly that way. Like, really? Okay, then tell me again. I got that wrong.
And honesty. I think when you say honestly, I got it wrong, I think that gives the kid like, you're not, no, I said it this way or whatever, and dismissing what they just spoke, right? So I love that. Just own up to it and then, okay, tell me again. I really want to get it right.
Well, and this is especially important now especially if you've got teenagers and they are middle school, maybe especially, where the language is already changing again. So if you had a teenager that just graduated, you knew all the words in the vernacular they were using. I don't know it again. So now I'm like, they come home and be like, man, he was selling. Selling's a good thing, right? No, it's not, actually. It means that you're not doing well. And so being able to ask even, like, if he says like a whole sentence and I don't know what any of that meant,
Right.
I need to ask, be curious. Curiosity is actually the superpower of successful people.
I love that.
Mhm.
I know. I also feel like teenagers can see through if you're trying. Like if I'm trying to talk like a teenager,
Oh,
they're
yeah,
gonna look
no.
at me and be like, "Absolutely not. That is not helpful." Or if I'm just like, "Oh yeah, just going along with it," and they're looking at
Yeah.
me going, "She has no idea
Right,
what we're talking
right.
about," and they can see through that very
Yeah.
very quickly.
And make sure you don't ask for the definition in a judgmental way. Like I hear parents that are like, "Don't say those words. That's silly. Don't."
Mm,
They're going to use the vernacular that they use. We used the vernacular that we had,
That's right.
right? And sounds silly to them now,
Mhm.
from the 70s and 80s.
It was
So
such a rad time.
exactly, gag me with a spoon,
For
all the
sure.
things. But to be curious and to be truly want to know the things that they're saying and experiencing, I think makes a difference. That goes back to building the rapport and the connection.
Mhm.
And Brenda, along that same question with this trust building, you mentioned it earlier, Karlie, and we do it in our groups. We have this ability, and you've also said it, keep showing up. And so if it's not a group setting, what are ways you think are possible for us to be able to keep showing up in a teenager's life to know that, hey, I want to have a relationship with you. I want you to trust. I want to show you I want to be an important person in your life.
I think asking questions is a lot of that in that space, because you don't have a whole lot of time with them in group.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, we don't have a lot of time with our teenagers these
Right.
days. They're running off to sports. They're going off to, they're going with friends. And so can we take advantage of the space we do have with them? And I think asking questions that make it about them,
Mm-hmm.
not asking questions about what they're going to be when they grow up. They don't know. And it's going to change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are very few kids who go all the way through and they are still doing what they said they were going to be doing when they were, 15.
Mm-hmm.
But I think asking questions about them and not being afraid to ask hard questions. I think that kids, they don't expect it, right? Because they don't know that they're going to like it. But I think some of those hard questions about, well, what did that do to you?
Hmm.
Or, man, that sounds like that was something really hard. Do you want to talk about it? I mean, even just the opening up of space, even if they don't take you up on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think asking questions is really important, and the key is to ask the right question.
Right.
So then that begs the question: what are the right questions?
Mm-hmm.
So the right questions are ones that aren't confrontational, but are deeper than surface. Okay, so fine line, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we balance being deeper than surface, but not being confrontational? So good things to stay away for are why.
Mm-hmm.
Because why is one of those questions that maybe implies that they've done something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll make them defensive.
Right.
But if you can ask how, what, and leave it really open. So I think sometimes as parents, we make the mistake of asking questions about a certain thing instead of a topic. So what did you and your friends do? As opposed to, what was the best thing that happened to you today? Or are you enjoying that set of friends? Do you feel like that's a place that you guys are going to stay friends for a long time? Right, which leaves it really open. Then they can tell you what they did today or what they talked about.
Right. We're asking too narrow of a question.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. So I would say open-ended questions, which is another one of the active listening techniques, but open-ended questions that really allow them to choose where to go with the conversation, and then we flow with that.
Mm-hmm. So Josh he's a basketball coach. And so I'm around these boys, but not a ton. And sometimes I find myself asking, like, how do I know when I have enough relational capital to ask a question that might be deeper? Or are they going to look at me and be like, you don't know me well enough to ask about that? Like, what are you doing? So I don't know if there's a clear answer to that, but how do you know, okay, I feel like there's enough relationship here that we can go deeper?
Yeah. So lots of times the kids, I was a basketball coach too for a while when my kids were young. And then you've got a bunch of kids, right? And you don't even know them very well. But here's one of the ways that you can tell kids, teenagers, whether you have relational equity, is that when you say hello to them, they actually look you in the eye and they follow up with something. And I think that it makes it small, right? So if you say, "Hey, how are you?" and they're like, "Fine," and mumble and look down, right, and go on, you don't have relational equity. But if they will look you in the eye and there's some sort of reaction, it doesn't have to be a smile, right? Because not all kids are wired to be friendly.
Right.
But it has to be some sort of reaction to you, non-verbally. And then it's a look you in the eye and give you the answer.
Mm.
And then you can tell that you've actually created a connection. So we're wired for connection. So neuroscience tells us that it's one of the reasons we yawn when other people do, right? So we are wired for connection with each other. And in some form, I don't know all the science, but our brains talk to each other. That's why when people yawn on the TV, you don't yawn. But when people who are near you,
Trying not to yawn
I'm
over
trying
there.
not to- yeah, right.
that you have a
same.
connection with, if they yawn, you do. So when you're around the dinner table or at Thanksgiving or whatever, and somebody yawns, you can see who likes that person, right? Because you only yawn with people you have a connection with. It is not a
Interesting.
universal thing.
Oh.
I
You
mean,
have to test that.
I know.
right?
Wow. Okay.
yeah. So it's really, really interesting. But I think that that's true. We can kind of see, I mean, if kids don't yawn when you do, you have to actually be looking at the person that yawns. You can't just hear a yawn. Anyway,
Right.
there's all these things about it. But I do think that kids will start to respond to you. And a lot of it is some eye contact. It is some sort of reaction, whether it's nonverbal or verbal, to your presence. If when you come in, they turn towards you rather than away. I mean, there's lots of things, right, that you can watch to see whether you've made that connection enough.
That's good and so helpful. Well, thank you, Brenda. I could keep going, and that's why we're going to have more episodes.
Yeah, that's good.
Because we want to keep picking your brain. But
Right.
thank you so much for the wisdom that you shared. And if you're listening to this podcast, as always, subscribe. You can also email podcast@teenlife.ngo if you have any questions that you want us to cover or topics that you want us to talk about. And we'll see you next week.